I mean, even your work, you can find contrary out there to all of your work that says, you're a kook, you're a conspiracy theorist, you're this, you're that. And then there's a whole nother side of the team that says, he's the greatest man that ever lived. He's exposed the biggest sham on the planet. And so, I mean, there's all, how do you, So talk to me about your book, and you give me the research that you've done. I want you to verify your book and the research that you've done, and lay it out for me real quick.
Well, on the research thing, this is interesting. I thank you for asking that question, because I seldom get asked that kind of a question. Everybody wants to know, well, what happened on Jekyll Island, and who were these people, and why did what did they do? But the question of the research is very, very important. Because,
it is,
as I said before, when you're dealing with upstream topics, you have to prove everything you say. And there's a lot of things you come across that you just know in your gut that's right because it fits. But you can't say it happened unless you can prove it. So I just put it aside, leave it out. I mean, what remains is so powerful that you don't need all the other stuff. So you got to get kind of hard-nosed about it. So consequently, I knew from the beginning.
There's something to be said. I don't mean to interrupt you, but there's something to be said about that, because, people look at the hard. You actually chose the hard evidence. You found other stuff, but you said, this is questionable. I don't want to add it because I don't want it to be questioned. So I'm going to leave the verifiable things in my book and leave it at that. So that's how you built the framework for the book.
All of it, yeah. There were a couple of things in there that I thought were extremely important, and so I put them in, and I would say this cannot be verified. But somebody said this. For example, there's a quotation, you've probably read it 100 times, attributed to Nathan Rothschild. Rothschild is supposed to have said, "Give me the power to issue the nation's money, and I care not who makes the laws." Yes. Like, everybody's heard that. I'm sure Rothschild said that. If he didn't say it, he thought it. But you cannot prove that he said this. It doesn't show up in his memoirs or any place. It's just everybody quotes him, and because everybody quotes him, that must be true. Well, so I said, this quote cannot be verified. However, judging by Rothschild's modus operandi and everything he did, that's pretty much how he operated. So,
and we're living that reality today.
Yeah, we're living that. Yeah. So there are times when you quote something and acknowledge that it can't be verified, but it's such a powerful statement that it crystallizes what you're talking about. So it becomes more rhetorical than a quote. And so,
just like you said, it fits the narrative. It fits what's actually transpired.
Yeah. So I had to go to original sources, and that was rich enough. It was amazing to me to see how much material there was really out there, written by the actors, the major actors themselves, either in the form of books or in the form of interviews that they gave to newspaper reporters, where they were quoted and published in the newspapers of the time. So that's a pretty good original source. And then, of course, they have biographers who quote them a lot. So if it's an official biographer of the time, then, okay, that's a good, reliable source too.
Yes.
So, but beyond that, there were a lot of books written by authors who were critical of the Federal Reserve, and there was a lot of opinion in those books. I couldn't quote those because that's just opinion, happened to be my opinion in most cases too. But who cares what my opinion is or their opinion? Let's get to the hard facts. And so that's why my book probably has more footnotes than most people are used to looking at, but almost every page is loaded with footnotes and comments about sources. Otherwise, nobody would believe it. And it pays off because, it forced me to be accurate. Like everybody else, I'm human, and I was often tempted to exaggerate, and I'd go get the eraser out. No. That's what you think, but leave that out of it, just to make a point. And a lot of books are ruined that way because the author exaggerates the facts. The facts are bad enough. Just leave them alone. You don't have to put any adjectives in there.
Well, that's good to know. I like that because there is a lot of noise out there about your book. of it being, it being exaggerated. And that's good to hear. It's good. That's what I wanted. I wanted to hear how you did your research, and I wanted to hear what made it tick and what made you tick and why you did what you did, and how you vetted the information. So I appreciate that answer, because that was something that I haven't heard answered, and I hadn't heard anybody ask you in some of the interviews that I've seen. So I appreciate that.
Well, it pays off, because let me just finish that in my thought, because when I finished the book, let's face it, I knew nothing about money and banking when I started down that path. I nothing about it. I mean, that wasn't my field. I'm not sure what my field was, to tell you the truth. I don't think I had one. I went to school to get a diploma. I didn't care. I got it in speech and communications is how it happened to be, but that didn't take much book learning. That was a lot of practice and all that kind of thing. So I was not a student. And I was more interested in, meeting the girls, having a good time, and going to college, all that stuff. That's great. I was supposed to have fun. That's the idea. So now I'm going to tackle the greatest complex scam in the world, banking, international banking in that history. Believe me, I had no idea what I was getting into. It's a good thing, because had I known, I would have said, no, that's too big for me. I can't do it. I got to go to college. Got to learn all this stuff in classroom somehow. So anyway, so now the point is that when I was done with this book, this huge thing, 600 pages, and I got it published, I thought, oh man, they're going to slaughter me. I'm
Were you scared?
Oh yeah. I was scared to death, because I thought there's going to be some college professor that really knows this stuff. He lived in it all his life. He's going to find that I was wrong on this point and wrong on that point, and I got this all wrong. And I thought, oh man, it's going to come, And I waited for it to happen. The book was out a week, and then 2 weeks, and then a month, and then went a whole year. I wasn't attacked. Oh, somebody wrote and found out that I had one of the czars mixed up. It was Tsar Nicholas II or the third, and said, okay, you can live with that. I corrected that one. Yeah. But nothing significant at all. And then I thought, I'm still going to get slaughtered. One day I was on the East Coast, and I was on a lecture tour. And I was invited to a radio station for an interview on the book. I said, oh, good. That's how we sell the book. We promote it, go on radio stations and talk about it. And so I got there, and I walked in, and there was another guy sitting at the table there next to the radio host. And I was introduced to Professor so-and-so from the local college. And this was the big debate was set up for me. I didn't even know it was going to be a debate.
Oh, shit.
I thought, this is my public execution, He's going to tear me.
Setup.
Yeah, because I know he read my book. See, I thought he had files and files of notes and error points. He was going to just slaughter me all over the place. So the host asked me to state my case. It's in about 2 or 3 minutes. What's your case? What are you saying about the Federal Reserve? So I took a big breath, and I told him, pretty much summarized it, that it was illegal, unconstitutional, immoral. It plundered the American people. It was dishonest. It was the way of funding aggressive wars, and it was, all of the things I could think of. It was wrong with it. How they create money out of nothing, and this causes inflation, steals money from the average working person. And I said, that's my thesis. And so the radio host then said, well, Professor Stone, what is your response to that? I braced myself, and he put his hands together, clasped them, and he shook his head up and down. And he said, well, everything he says is true, but we're living well, aren't we? I knew then that I had it made. I hadn't made too many mistakes. And of course, that was easy to answer. Well, you may be living well, Professor so-and-so, and I am living fairly well. But how about the millions and millions and millions of people who aren't living so well because of all what I just said?
Yeah.
And we got onto it. So, I was lucky because of the very thing we're talking about. I'm glad you brought this up, because had I gone too far beyond what the facts could demonstrate, why then the professor would have had me on the floor.
Then that leads to my next question. I want to hear from Mr. Griffin your elevator speech, so you can tell all of the audience here what the Fed is, what it does, and what it means in our life, based on all of your research and everything that you've learned to date. And the state that everything is in right now. Give us your elevator pitch on the Fed.
Yeah, I've learned to do that. I can do it even better than that. You can condense things down to very short statements, even the most complex things. And the Federal Reserve can be condensed down to 3 words. It's a scam. Okay. Any questions? Okay. Well, why is it a scam? Now we complicate a little bit. Well, it's a scam because it pretends to be something which it is not. Oh, okay. Well, that's a scam. Well, what does it pretend to be that it is not? Well, okay. Pretends to be a bank, for one thing. It's not a bank. What is it? It's a cartel. What? Most people, they're not even quite sure what a cartel is, but they know that there's a drug cartel in South America, and is that kind of a cartel? Well, pretty close to that, but I'm thinking more of the corporate cartel, which by a dictionary definition is when companies in a certain field, which are on the surface at least, are competitors, they'll join together and form an association, and they agree not to compete with each other. They agree to fix prices, or in this case, the banks got together to fix interest rates and to regulate themselves. And so that mainly this was to keep out competition, keep the new banks from coming in. And the big banks would dominate the field forevermore because they would be able to, they set their own regulations, the cost of entry and the regulations of compliance and all that sort of thing. It makes it too expensive for startups to occur. And of course, they can set limits on how much money they can create out of nothing, and the fact that they can create money out of nothing. All of those rules and regulations are set by the cartel in this case. So the first part, though, is it's a cartel, and it's nothing more than that. And these banks agree not to compete with each other and all move in unison. And they create money out of, well, you can say they create money out of nothing, which is true, but it's even worse than that. They create money out of debt. When the banks loan money to you or to a corporation or to a government or to any institution, most of it they don't have. They loan money they don't have. That's the kind of a startling thing. Well, then how could they loan money they don't have? Well, they just create it out of nothing. They may have on their asset balance sheet maybe 10% of the loan in the form of government bonds or corporate certificates, stock certificates or something, but there's 10%. Now the other 90%, they just create out of nothing. Mm-hmm. And they just... Which is
this fractional reserve banking thing.
That's the name they give it, fractional reserve banking. But the essence of it is that they don't have it to lend, so they create it. So the whole money supply in America and the world now, for the most part, is money that sprang into being based on debt. And so that's amazing.
And not the people's debt, the bank's debt that they've created for themselves, correct?
No, they've created the debt for the people. The person is comes to the bank and wants to borrow $100,000 from the bank. And the bank says, well, we've only got $10,000 here in our assets, but that's okay. Here's a check for $100,000. It's a loan to you.
Well, yeah, I mean, they pass that off as, but they've actually created it themselves, and they created the debt themselves, and then passed it along to the consumer.
That's right. They create the debt instrument. It's a loan sheet of paper. It's a loan, IOU. That's it. Yeah. Government bonds, and the basis for all the 90% of the money in circulation is basically an IOU. So it's a piece of paper that says IOU. You better pay it back to me, or else we come take your house, we come take your factory, and we come take your farm, and all that stuff. So it's a fraud, but it's a very lucrative fraud because if you can create money out of nothing, you don't have to charge an awful lot of interest on it to show a profit. And that's the game they play. That's the game they play.